Welcome to another video from the Department of International Relations here at the ANU from our seminar series with one of our special guests. My name's Ben Zala, and today I have with me Professor Alex Bellamy from the University of Queensland, who is with us today to give a paper about world peace and how it can be achieved. So it's a nice juicy topic for us in international relations. There's lots of excitement around the department. Everyone's very much looking forward to the paper this afternoon. I thought I'd just start by asking you, what was the impetus for writing this paper? Where does this come from? Is this sort of a natural outgrowth of your previous work or things you were working on, or have you decided to take a bit of a left turn, or where does the drive come from?
So it is a bit of a left turn, and there's an intellectual answer to that question and also the real answer.
Sure.
So the real answer is, a few years ago I was overseas and got a bit sick and needed to recuperate, and one of my colleagues, a guy called Roland Bleicher, gave me use of his house in Switzerland for a couple of weeks to recuperate before I made the journey back. And not being a German speaker, I didn't have access to TV. All I had access to was Roland's library. So I spent 2 weeks reading a set of books that I wouldn't normally read and thinking about questions that I wouldn't normally think about, and that's what got me into thinking about these big issues around world peace. Now the intellectual answer, or the rationale behind it, is really that, you know, for the last decade I've been working very much in the weeds around responsibility to protect, prevention of genocide and mass atrocities, and that's still very much the day job. But it's very much a band-aid on a problem. So however successful we are in that area is still only, you know, it's very limited. You know, it's not dealing with the fundamental problem, and unless we make real progress on the prevention of armed conflicts and progress towards bigger issues of peace, we're forever going to be in a sort of band-aid mode when it comes to R2P and atrocity prevention. And of course this is one of the priorities of the new UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He's made the point numerous times that we need to prioritise the prevention of armed conflict, and unless we get some of that right, we're not going to make real and sustained progress on the other things as well. It's forever going to be band-aid and emergency response. So this has been a sort of one of those sort of fun academic projects where you read books that you wouldn't normally read and try to think through big questions and try to be a bit more provocative and maybe less guarded than you would be normally in the day job.
Fantastic, absolutely. So we can thank Roland for the initial spark.
Or blame him, as the case may be.
That's right. So in that sense, in that case, give us a bit of an outline of the main argument. What are you driving at here in terms of the central conclusion that you're drawing from the paper?
Well, I guess the main argument, and the paper is an overview of the book, so the book that will be coming out hopefully later in the year.
Great.
And the main argument is that world peace is possible. Not that it's likely, not that it's going to happen anytime soon, but that it is possible. Part of the sort of subtext of that is also to try to encourage a wider conversation, both in IR and beyond IR, that recognises that thinking about and practicing world peace has a history as long and diverse and varied as thinking about war. So it's a bit of also a response to historian Michael Howard's argument that, you know, war is ancient, peace was a 19th century invention. So part of what I wanted to argue is actually, as soon as war appeared in human society, so too did theories and practices of peace. So part of what the book tries to do is to recover that. But the argument is basically that if we kind of look at the underlying drivers of why war still happens, it boils down to three big things. Firstly, it's to do with the way we organise ourselves into groups that have different sets of values, languages and interests. Secondly, it's to do with the basic fact that between those and within those groups, war has proven to be fairly profitable. So they're, you know, as a rational instrument of policy, the winners have tended to do well out of war. And the third thing is to do with the fact that war is contagious, that even where you have an individual society that maybe chooses a warless path, sooner or later war is going to catch up with you. And one of the examples I talk about in the book are the ancient Phoenicians, who survived for about 1,000 years in one of the most bloodthirsty and war-prone regions of the world, but never had an army. They offered an alternative way of organising themselves and relating to others, but eventually war caught up with them in the shape of Alexander the Great.
Right.
So those are the three deep structural reasons, I think, why war persists. Now the hope comes from the fact that all three of them are, of course, to do with the way we organise ourselves socially. So all three are subject to change. But one of the other kind of arguments of the book is that actually we are much closer to world peace than we might think we are, in that we already have most of the laws and institutions we need. And if we were to do nothing else other than simply implement the decisions we've made and enforce the laws we have, we would already get quite close to the goal of world peace. There'd be a little bit more to do,
Sure.
but a lot of the groundwork is actually already there. So one example I give is one of the big structural things that societies can do to contribute to greater peacefulness is gender equality. So there's now a lot of qualitative and quantitative research that shows a clear correlation between gender equality and greater peacefulness, both less proneness to civil war, but also less aggressive foreign policies. Now you might think, oh, gender equality, that's, you know, big, impossible, utopian pipe dream, but it's also one of the sustainable development goals. So it's something to which every government has committed themselves to. So it may be difficult, hard to achieve, and not likely to happen by 2030.
Sure.
But it isn't just an idle dream of academics. It's
The argument's been won, in a
yeah,
sense.
that's right. And you find that a lot with a lot of the kind of the core bedrocks needed for world peace.
So this is interesting. There's a sort of a status quo argument here, that essentially it's about sustaining and deepening the things that we have, as opposed to some kind of radical, you know, structural change and so forth.
Absolutely. That's one of the points of sort of critique of world peace that you find over and over again, is that, of course, traditionally world peace has been associated with big blueprints for radical change, and as such has a history of being associated with huge bouts of cataclysmic violence, because when you have a major radical ideology, you tend to find there are people who don't agree with you, and so you use lots of violence to impose your will on others. So through history, world peace has not always been associated with greater peacefulness. You look at, you know, right through folks like Napoleon talking about bringing peace to Europe through, you know, ultimately through the barrel of a gun. So one of the arguments I'll be making as well is around how we think about world peace, and that we shouldn't think of world peace as about a single blueprint, but instead as about what the historian Jay Winter talks about, what he calls minor utopias. So it's lots of little victories in context-specific places, won by different sorts of actors in different sorts of ways, that cumulatively work together to make the world more peaceful.
So you mentioned, you sort of touched on a bunch of voices out there in the literature that you're either reacting to and reacting against, you know, the likes of Michael Howard, or others, you know, that you're building on their work and taking aspects of it. So who are you primarily trying to talk to with the book and this paper that you're giving from it today? Is this a conversation with IR? Is this a conversation more with that subset that we would think of as peace studies, that, you know, has this as their sort of bread and butter? Or is this broader? Could you envisage practitioners picking this up and flipping through?
So it's a good question. The original, and the hope is broader. The dream would be to see it on the bookshelves in airports. And that's not going to happen because it has peace in the title, not war.
Sure.
But part of the sort of underlying goal is, in a sense, to rescue the idea of world peace from the beauty pageants. To actually say, you know, this is an important topic. It was the subject that was at the heart of the foundation of IR when the first chairs were created, and it's something we should be thinking about and talking about. So the audience here goes all the way from IR through to peace studies, and hopefully beyond, to spur a broader conversation about what are the things that need to happen to make the world more peaceful, and really to try and kind of unpack the fact that when we're thinking about issues of war and peace, you know, our unconscious biases shape what we think is possible, and because most of us don't think world peace is possible, that shapes then what we think can be achieved, and then shapes the sorts of things we get active on and work towards. So the book is meant to be a conversation starter, and meant to be deliberately provocative. There are lots of loose ends, probably more loose ends than tied up ends, in the hope that it will spark a wider discussion. I mean, specifically with peace studies, I would say that the book is a sort of a reflection on where peace studies has gone and where it could go to. So peace studies have become very good at understanding the particular dynamics of individual conflicts, or particular factors that relate to peacefulness and war, improving how we think about conflict resolution. You know, in the time that I've been in the field, you know, what we know has expanded immensely. But as it's sort of drilled down more, it's forgotten to ask those sort of big questions about where we're going overall, what are the sorts of things that governments ought to prioritise more broadly. So it's a book that tries to add that back into the debate as well.
So then, I thought I'd just ask you a final question that in a sense leads logically from this. I mean, not only in what you're trying to do with this book, but in the work that you're very well known for around humanitarian intervention and R2P and so forth. You have a sort of a strand of this work that is based around policy engagement. So with the centre up at UQ, but also in your work globally, it's not just what you would think of as pure academic scholarship, right? So it's engaging with policymakers, think tanks and so forth. How important is this to you as a scholar? How important is it to be engaging with policy relevant questions? Are these things that sort of naturally come out of your work, or do you go and seek it? Do you push yourself to go and do that?
Good question. So I'm only a part-time academic, really. For most of the last decade I've only been a part-time academic, because half of my job is running this R2P Centre, which is primarily about policy and advocacy, where the research drives advocacy, policy and dialogue. And my research is often sort of straddled that, because I think we can only do good policy work if we're also doing good research and trying to understand what's going on. So for me, it's sort of part and parcel of what I do. Some research projects are more policy focused than others, and there are these sorts of big questions like world peace, for example, that don't have a direct policy relevance. But yeah, it's a core part of what I do, but it's such a kind of broad field that I wouldn't want to say that this is what everyone should do, because it isn't.
Isn't for everyone.
Lots of questions are worth asking just because they're worth asking, and part of the fun of this book was precisely that, just asking these big questions because they seem to be big and interesting questions.
Sure.
But the other thing, I guess, that I sometimes take from the policy world is the fact that there are big and important questions that governments and civil society don't know the answer to, and that's one of the things that the centre is able to do, because we've got the time and the space and the freedom to think thoughts that policymakers have none of those things to do. But it's often a useful source of research puzzles. Things like some of the work we do on atrocity prevention, for example. Why is it that some societies with all the risk factors experience mass atrocities and some others don't? What's going on in those that don't, and what can be taken from those to help those that do? Those are the sorts of questions that get raised in the policy domain that sort of influences our work as well.
Sure. Great. Well, thank you very much for coming in and having a chat.
My pleasure.
We're looking forward to the paper this afternoon, and looking forward to seeing the book when it arrives.
Great. Thanks very much.
Cheers.